In 1840, rural Pennsylvania, 10-year-old Mary Hartley is forced to marry 60-year-old Cornelius Blackwood, a wealthy landowner whose 3 previous child brides all died mysteriously within months of their weddings. What the townspeople whisper about in shadows becomes Mary's waking nightmare as she discovers her new husband isn't just a predator, but something ancient wearing human skin. The scratching sounds in the walls aren't mice, and the locked room in the cellar holds secrets that explain why Cornelius has lived in this town for over a century, always looking exactly 60 years old, always marrying young girls who never survived to see their 11th birthdays. The worst part wasn't the wedding dress, though at 10 years old Mary Hartley's feet dangled a full foot above the floor when they seated her for the fitting, and the seamstress had to take in the waist 3 times before it stopped sliding off her thin shoulders. The worst part was that everyone in Millbrook knew exactly what kind of man Cornelius Blackwood was, and they let it happen anyway. They had let it happen 3 times before. "Hold still, child," Miss Garrett muttered through a mouthful of pins, her weathered hands adjusting the white fabric that pooled around Mary like spilled milk. Mr. Blackwood paid good money for French lace. Wouldn't want to disappoint him. The way she said it, flat and mechanical, told Mary that Miss Garrett had done this before. Maybe for Catherine Blackwood, who had lasted 4 months. Or Anna Blackwood before her, who made it to... Or the first one, Elizabeth, whose name people only whispered now, as if saying it too loud might summon whatever had taken her after just 2 months of marriage. Mary's mother stood in the corner of the fitting room, counting the coins Cornelius had already given them. 30 silver pieces exactly, enough to save their farm from the bank, enough to feed Mary's 4 younger siblings through the harsh Pennsylvania winter that was already sending its first warnings through the October wind. Her mother's fingers trembled as she counted, and Mary wondered if it was from excitement or something else. She had seen her mother cry only once, since Papa died of lung fever last spring, late at night when she thought all the children were asleep. But Mary had heard her through the thin walls, whispering prayers that sounded more like apologies. "The Blackwood house is the finest in the county," Mrs. Garrett continued, her voice filling the silence that threatened to swallow them all. "You'll have your own room, of course. Miss Blackwood is very particular about that. Your own room with a lock on the door." She paused, needle hovering above the hem. "A lock that works from the inside." He insisted on that after Catherine. Mary wanted to ask what happened after Catherine, but she already knew she wouldn't get an answer. The adults in Millbrook had perfected the art of talking around the truth, creating elaborate patterns of words that never quite touched the dark center of things. They spoke of unfortunate circumstances and God's will and delicate constitutions, but never about the scratching sounds that the pastor's son claimed to have heard coming from the Blackwood cellar. Never about why Cornelius looked exactly the same as he had in the daguerreotype from 1795 that Mary had once seen in the town hall, before it mysteriously disappeared. The fitting room door opened with a creak that made all 3 of them jump. Cornelius Blackwood stood in the doorway, his 60-year-old face arranged in what might have been a smile if it reached his eyes. Those eyes were the wrong color, not quite brown, not quite black, but something in between that seemed to shift, depending on the light, like oil on water, like the surface of the well behind their farm where Papa's body had been found. No, Papa had died of lung fever, in his bed. Mary's mother had said so, again and again, until the words became a kind of prayer. "Beautiful," Cornelius said, and his voice had that same quality as his eyes, slippery, hard to pin down. He stepped into the room uninvited, his expensive boots silent on the wooden floor. Everything about him was expensive and silent. His black wool coat that never seemed to collect dust, his gold pocket watch that didn't tick, his presence that somehow made the temperature drop just enough for Mary to see her own breath, even though the October afternoon was unseasonably warm. "Mr. Blackwood," Mary's mother stammered, clutching the coins against her chest. "We weren't expecting the wedding isn't until..." Saturday. Yes, I'm aware. He moved closer to Mary, circling her slowly like a wolf evaluating prey. No, that wasn't right. Wolves were warm-blooded things that killed for understandable reasons. This was something else. I wanted to ensure everything was proceeding correctly. My previous wives were all disappointed with their dresses. Eventually, Mrs. Garrett's needle slipped, pricking her finger. A drop of blood beaded on her weathered skin, and Cornelius's head turned toward it with mechanical precision. His nostrils flared slightly, and for just a moment, Mary could have sworn she saw something move behind his eyes, something that wasn't human. Something that had been watching from behind that oil-slick surface for longer than Millbrook had existed. "How clumsy of me," Miss Garrett whispered, pressing her finger to her mouth. Cornelius watched the gesture with an intensity that made Mary's stomach twist. "Indeed," he said finally, turning his attention back to Mary. "Tell me, child, do you dream?" The question was so unexpected that Mary almost answered honestly, almost said yes. She dreamed every night now. Dreams of white dresses turning red. Dreams of scratching sounds that weren't quite human and weren't quite animal. Dreams of her father standing at the edge of the well, his eyes reflecting that same oil-slick darkness, his mouth moving in words she couldn't hear over the sound of something breathing in the walls. "Sometimes, sir," she said instead, "because that seemed safer." "Good." He reached out and touched a strand of her wheat-colored hair, rubbing it between his fingers like he was testing fabric. "The ones who don't dream never last long. They have nothing to contribute." Her mother made a small sound, maybe protest, maybe just fear, finally breaking through the wall of desperation that 30 silver pieces had built. Cornelius's hand dropped from Mary's hair, and he turned to face her mother with that not-quite smile. "Mrs. Hartley, I trust you've explained to Mary the nature of our arrangement. She knows she's to be married, sir. She knows her duty." "Her duty?" He tasted the word like wine. "Yes, I suppose that's one way to describe it. Though I prefer to think of it as an exchange. I provide for your family's temporal needs, and Mary provides for mine. Different needs, of course. I'm not a young man anymore." The lie slipped out so easily that Mary almost believed it, even though she had seen that daguerreotype. Even though old Miss Morrison, before the fever took his mind, had grabbed Mary's arm at church and whispered that Cornelius Blackwood had married his own grandmother back in 1798, and she had lasted only 6 weeks. "She's a good girl," her mother said, and now her voice was definitely shaking. "Obedient, quiet. She knows her prayers." Prayers, another wine-tasting word. How comforting, though I find they become less articulate after the first few nights. Catherine could barely manage our father by the end. Anna forgot the words entirely. And Elizabeth? Well, Elizabeth found entirely new words, ancient ones. Unfortunate, really. I had hopes for Elizabeth. The room felt colder now, cold enough that frost was actually forming on the window glass, creating patterns that looked almost like hands pressed against the pane from outside. But they were on the second floor, and there was nothing outside that window but empty air and a 40-foot drop to the cobblestones below. "The dress is perfect," Cornelius announced suddenly, breaking whatever spell had been forming in the frozen air. "White becomes you, Mary. It shows the blue of your veins so clearly, like rivers under snow. I've always been fascinated by rivers." He pulled out his soundless pocket watch, consulted it, and nodded. "Saturday, then. Noon sharp. The sun will be directly overhead. I do so prefer marriages at noon. The shadows are so much shorter. Shadows can hide such unfortunate things." He left without goodbye, the door closing behind him with a soft click that somehow sounded final. The frost on the window immediately began to melt, running down the glass in rivulets that looked disturbingly like tears or blood. In the right light, water could look like anything. Mrs. Garrett pulled the pins from her mouth and began packing up her sewing kit with quick, nervous movements. "That's enough for today," she said, helping Mary out of the dress with hands that wouldn't quite stop shaking. "We'll finish the hem tomorrow." But Mary noticed she didn't say which tomorrow. Tomorrow before the wedding, or one of the tomorrows after, when Mary would be living in the Blackwood house with its locked doors and scratching walls and cellar full of secrets. How many tomorrows did Catherine have? How many did Anna count before the counting stopped? Her mother helped her back into her regular dress, faded blue cotton that had belonged to 3 older cousins before it came to Mary. Normal fabric for a normal girl who should have had normal tomorrows, stretching ahead of her like a road through summer fields. Instead, she had Saturday, noon sharp, when the shadows would be shortest and Cornelius Blackwood would make her his 4th wife in 5 years. That night, Mary lay in bed, listening to her siblings breathe in the darkness. Tomorrow she would share this room for the last time. Tomorrow night would be her last night as Mary Hartley. By Saturday night she would be Mary Blackwood, sleeping in a room with a lock that worked from the inside, in a house where 3 girls had already discovered that locks only work if the thing you're trying to keep out needs doors. The scratching started at midnight, just like it had every night since Cornelius had first come to their farm with his proposal and his 30 pieces of silver. But tonight Mary understood something she hadn't before. The scratching wasn't coming from outside the walls, it was coming from inside them, and it sounded like fingernails. The Blackwood house squatted on Millbrook's highest hill like something that had grown from the earth, rather than been built upon it. 3 stories of black stone that seemed to absorb sunlight rather than reflect it. Windows that watched the town below with the patience of a spider in its web. Mary counted those windows from the carriage, 13 on each floor, which meant either terrible planning or deliberate choice, and with Cornelius Blackwood nothing was unplanned. Even now, sitting beside her in the carriage on their wedding morning, he had positioned himself at exactly the right angle to keep his face in shadow, despite the noon sun blazing overhead. "You're quieter than the others," he observed, his gloved hands resting on the silver head of his walking stick. Mary had noticed he never actually used it for walking. He moved with the fluid grace of something much younger or much older than his apparent 60 years. Catherine talked incessantly, nervous chatter about absolutely nothing. Anna sang hymns as if that would change anything. And Elizabeth, he paused, and Mary caught a glimpse of something that might have been regret, if regret could wear such a hungry face. Elizabeth asked questions. Mary wanted to ask what kind of questions, but she had learned something important in the 3 days since the fitting. Cornelius offered information like breadcrumbs, leading somewhere specific. Following that trail too eagerly led to revelations that arrived before you were ready for them. Like when he'd mentioned, almost casually at dinner with her family, that the wine they were drinking had been bottled in 7. "From my grandfather's collection," he'd said, watching Mary's face carefully. But the town records she'd snuck into the church to read showed Cornelius had no grandfather in Millbrook. No father either. The first mention of a Cornelius Blackwood was in 1742, buying the land where his house now stood. The same Cornelius, described the same way, 60 years old, silver-haired, wealthy beyond explanation. The carriage lurched to a stop, and Mary realized they'd arrived without her noticing the journey. The house loomed above them, and this close, she could see things that distance had hidden. The black stones weren't uniform. Some were older, covered in lichens that looked almost like writing in a language that hurt to perceive directly. Others were newer, added recently, still sharp-edged and gleaming, as if the house was still growing, still feeding. "Welcome home, Miss Blackwood," Cornelius said, and the name hit Mary like cold water. She'd been prepared for it, had practiced responding to it, but hearing it spoken in his oil-slick voice made it real in a way that the wedding ceremony hadn't. Perhaps because the ceremony had been wrong in small, vital ways. The priest, not their usual Father Martin, but a thin, nervous man from 2 towns over, had stammered through vows that weren't quite the traditional words. Small changes, phrases that sounded almost like Latin, but weren't, responses that Cornelius gave in a language that seemed to bypass Mary's ears and speak directly to her bones. The front door opened before they reached it, though Mary saw no one inside. Cornelius guided her across the threshold with a hand on her back that felt colder than the October air, and the door shut behind them with a sound like a mouth closing. The entrance hall stretched impossibly far, lined with portraits that all seemed to show the same subject from slightly different angles. Not different people, the same person, painted from perspectives that shouldn't exist. A face viewed from inside the skull, a profile that showed both sides simultaneously. A portrait where the eyes followed you, not by seeming to move, but by actually moving. The paint still wet after what must have been decades. "Your room," Cornelius said, leading her up a staircase that had too many steps. Mary counted 43 steps to reach what should have been the second floor of a 3-story house. The hallway he led her down was lined with doors, all identical, all locked with keys that hung from hooks beside them. "This was Catherine's," he said, touching one door. "Anna's, another, Elizabeth's, a third," and Mary noticed this one had scratch marks on the inside of the keyhole, as if someone had tried to pick it from within. Her room was at the end of the hall, larger than the others, with windows on 3 walls that should have been architecturally impossible given the house's exterior. The bed was child-sized, with white sheets that smelled of lavender and something else, something chemical and sharp. A wardrobe stood open, revealing dresses in her exact size, though no one had taken her measurements except for the wedding dress. A vanity with a mirror that reflected the room a half-second late, as if the image had to travel from somewhere else to reach the glass. "You'll notice the lock," Cornelius said, demonstrating, "it works from the inside as promised. You may lock it whenever you wish. I encourage you to do so." He handed her the key, and it was warm, body temperature, but not from his hand, as if it had its own circulation. "Dinner is at 8 precisely. The dining room is downstairs, second door on the left. Don't open any other doors. Not yet." He left her there, and Mary immediately locked the door, hearing the tumblers fall into place with a satisfaction that felt premature. She was safe from Cornelius, perhaps, but the scratching sounds she'd heard at home had followed her here, were already starting in the walls around her. Not random anymore, but rhythmic, deliberate, like Morse code, like a countdown. She went to the window, hoping to see the town below, perhaps even her family's farm in the distance. But the view showed something else entirely, a forest that didn't exist in Pennsylvania, full of trees with black bark and red leaves, moving in wind that her windows didn't feel. And in that forest, shapes moved between the trees. White shapes that might have been dresses. Small shapes that moved with the stumbling gait of children who had forgotten how to walk properly. A knock at her door made her spin around, heart hammering. "Yes? It's Mrs. Crawford, dear." The housekeeper. The voice was normal, maternal even, and Mary felt herself relax slightly. She unlocked the door to find a woman in her 50s, grey-haired and solid, carrying a tea tray. Nothing about her seemed wrong, which itself felt wrong in this house of impossibilities. "Mr. Blackwood thought you might like some tea," Mrs. Crawford said, setting the tray on a small table in the window. "To help you settle in." "You're not afraid of him," Mary said, the observation slipping out before she could stop it. Mrs. Crawford's hand stilled on the teapot. "Afraid? No, child. I've been with the family for a very long time. One learns to accommodate certain peculiarities." "How long?" The woman's face did something complicated, as if multiple expressions were fighting for control. "Since 1794, or was it 1840? Time moves strangely in this house. You'll understand soon enough." She poured the tea with steady hands, despite the impossibility of what she'd just said. "Drink this. It helps with the transition." "What transition? From what you were to what you'll become. We all go through it. Those of us who last. The ones who don't." She glanced at the door. "Well, they feed the house in other ways." Mary picked up the teacup, then set it down without drinking. What happened to the other wives? Which ones? There have been so many. Before Catherine, Anna and Elizabeth, there was Margaret before her Sarah in 1811. Before her, Mrs. Crawford's eyes went distant. I was young once, younger than you, but I learned the rules, and rules keep you alive here. Would you like to know them? Mary nodded, her mouth too dry to speak. First, never go to the cellar, no matter what you hear, no matter who seems to be calling you. Second, don't trust the mirrors after midnight. They show what was, not what is. Third, when he comes to your door at night, and he will, don't let him in unless the moon is new. He's different when there's no moon. Safer, if such a word applies. Fourth, if you find doors that weren't there before, don't open them. The house likes to play games, and not all roads lead back. Fifth, and most important, when you start to change, and you will, don't fight it. Fighting makes it worse. Ask Elizabeth. But Elizabeth is dead. Mrs. Crawford smiled, and it was the saddest thing Mary had ever seen. Dead is a very specific word, child. Elizabeth is elsewhere, still in the house in a way. You'll hear her sometimes, especially on Wednesdays. She always hated Wednesdays. The older woman moved to leave, then paused at the door. One more thing. You'll find a diary in your nightstand drawer. Don't read it until you've been here a month. It's from all of them, all the wives who came before. They each added their own pages before they transitioned. When you're ready, you'll add yours too. After Mrs. Crawford left, Mary immediately went to the nightstand. The diary was there, leather-bound and locked with a small brass clasp that opened at her touch. The first page was dated 1743, written in fading brown ink that looked disturbingly like dried blood. I was 10 when he took me. I am 10 still, though 90 winters have passed through my bones. This house eats time as surely as it eats flesh. If you are reading this, you are his new bride. I am sorry. I am so very sorry. Margaret, the first. Mary slammed the diary shut, her hands shaking. Outside her impossible windows, the sun was setting, though it had been noon only an hour ago. Or had it been longer? Time moved strangely here, Mrs. Crawford had said. Already Mary could feel it, that strange pulling sensation, as if the house was drawing something out of her 1 second at a time. The scratching in the walls grew louder as darkness fell, and now she would hear voices within it. Young voices, girl voices, counting down from 10 over and over, never reaching 0, always starting again. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 10, 9, 8. Dinner at 8 meant something different in the Blackwood house. Mary descended the 43 steps at exactly 8 o'clock, but the grandfather clock in the entrance hall showed 3:17. The clock in the dining room read midnight. Her own sense of time, that internal rhythm every human carries, insisted it was still afternoon. This temporal discord made her nauseated, as if she was seasick on dry land, and she had to grip the doorframe to steady herself before entering the dining room where Cornelius waited. The table could have seated 30, but was set for 2, their places at opposite ends of its vast expanse. Between them stretched a landscape of silver candelabras and covered dishes that steamed without apparent heat. Cornelius sat in shadow despite the 100 candles burning around the room, their flames all bending toward him as if he was pulling their light into himself without it ever reaching his face. Punctual, he said, and his voice carried perfectly across the distance that should have muffled it. Catherine was always late. It irritated me considerably. Please, sit. Mary took her seat, and immediately the chair adjusted itself, rising until she was at the proper height for the table, despite her child's stature. The plate before her was bone china so thin she could see her hands through it, painted with scenes that seemed to move when she wasn't looking directly at them. Pastoral settings that became something else in her peripheral vision. Fields that were actually faces, streams that ran red, trees whose branches ended in fingers. You didn't drink Mrs. Crawford's tea, Cornelius observed, though Mary was certain he hadn't been there to see her refuse it. Wise, it would have made things easier, but easier isn't always better. Elizabeth refused it too. She lasted the longest. How long? Mary found her voice, though it came out smaller than intended. 4 months, 3 days, 17 hours. He lifted a cover from one of the dishes, revealing meat that was too red, too fresh, cut in shapes that didn't come from any animal. Mary recognized. She was special. Elizabeth. She had what my grandfather would have called the sight. Could see things as they really were, not as they pretended to be. It drove her quite mad, of course. Seeing the truth usually does. Mary watched him place a portion on his plate, the meat still moving slightly as if it remembered being alive. Her stomach turned, but she forced herself to ask, "Your grandfather who collected wine in 1763. Cornelius smiled, and for the first time it reached his eyes, turning them into black pools that reflected nothing. Clever. Yes, my grandfather. Also my father. Also myself. We are a family of singular tradition, you might say. Would you care for some? No? Perhaps you're not hungry yet. You will be, eventually. The house has a way of changing appetites." He ate with precise mechanical movements, never actually seeming to swallow. The food simply disappeared into him, and Mary noticed his shadow on the wall grew slightly more solid with each bite, more real than the man casting it. She looked at her own shadow and found it flickering, uncertain, as if she wasn't quite decided on being real herself. "Tell me about your dreams," Cornelius said suddenly. "The ones you've been having since our engagement." Mary hadn't told anyone about the dreams, the ones where she walked through the house's walls like smoke, where she found rooms full of girls in white dresses, all standing perfectly still, their mouths open in silent screams, where she descended to the cellar, despite every warning, and found something that wore Cornelius's face, but had too many eyes, all of them hungry, all of them ancient, all of them watching her specifically. "I dream about the scratching," she said carefully.
Oh, they're eager to meet you.
"The others, they get so lonely, you see. Each in their own room, their own time. Did you know this house exists in 17 different years simultaneously? You're in 1840. Catherine is still in 1839, still dying, still discovering what happens when you try to run. Anna exists in 1837, singing her hymns to walls that learned to sing back. Elizabeth found a way to exist in all of them, at once. Magnificent and terrible. She's in this room right now, in fact. If you know how to look." Mary's eyes darted around the room, seeing nothing but shadows and candlelight. Then she noticed it, one shadow that fell the wrong way, against the light instead of away from it. A small shadow, child-sized, standing perfectly still in the corner. When she looked directly at it, it vanished. When she looked away, it crept closer. "There we are," Cornelius said approvingly. "You're beginning to see. The tea would have prevented that, kept you blind and comfortable until it was too late. But I think you might be another Elizabeth. Special. Worth the extra effort. What are you?" The question erupted from Mary before fear could stop it. Cornelius set down his silverware with deliberate care. "I am a husband, a collector, a tradition maintained since before this country was a country, before this land had a name that your tongue could pronounce. My family came here following something older than families, older than following. We made a bargain, you see. Immortality for a price paid in innocence. Not all at once. That would be wasteful. Drop by drop, year by year, wife by wife." The shadow in the corner was definitely closer now, and Mary could almost make out features, a face that might have been pretty once, before something fundamental was taken from it. Eyes that were just holes now, a mouth that moved in words no one could hear. Elizabeth, still trying to warn the next girl in line, but immortality is such a limited concept, Cornelius continued, rising from his chair with movements that seemed to skip frames, as if reality couldn't quite track him properly. "Why live forever? In one time when you can live in all times. Why have one wife when you can have them all, forever, each in their own perfect moment of terror? The house holds them like insects in amber, preserved at the exact instant they understand what's happening to them. It's beautiful, really. You'll see. He moved toward her, not walking but simply being closer with each blink, and Mary found herself paralyzed. The chair that had so helpfully adjusted itself now held her like hands, its wood grain opening into tiny mouths that whispered in languages that predated speech. The portraits on the walls all turned to watch, and she realized they weren't portraits of Cornelius. They were portraits of all the things that had worn his shape over the centuries, each one less human than the last. "Tonight is your first feeding," he said, standing behind her chair now, though she hadn't seen him move. His hands rested on her shoulders, cold even through her dress, and where he touched her, she could feel something flowing out, not blood or warmth, but something more essential, time itself, perhaps. Years she hadn't lived yet, decades that should have been hers, all flowing into him like water into drought-dry earth. Just a little, to start, too much at once, and you break like Catherine, too little, and you fight like Anna. But just right, and you transform like Elizabeth. Mary tried to scream but found she had no voice, or rather, her voice was somewhere else, upstairs in her room perhaps, or next week, or 7043 when the first Margaret discovered that accepting Cornelius Blackwood's proposal meant becoming part of his collection forever. She could feel herself spreading thin across time, experiencing every moment of her life simultaneously, birth and death, and everything between happening at once. She was 5 and learning to read. She was 30, and never would be 30. She was old, ancient, older than the stones of the house, older than the bargain that built it. Then Elizabeth's shadow moved, really moved, stepping between Mary and Cornelius with a soundless shriek that shattered 3 of the windows. Not the glass, the actual windows, leaving spaces in the walls that opened onto nothing. Cornelius snarled, a sound no human throat could make, and Elizabeth's shadow burst apart into 1,000 pieces that reformed into words written in the air. "Run now while he's weak." The chair released Mary and she ran. Not to her room. That's what Catherine had done. Not outside. Anna's mistake. She ran toward the one place everyone had warned her not to go. The cellar. Because if everyone warned you away from something in a house of horrors, maybe it wasn't to protect you. Maybe it was to protect something else. Behind her, Cornelius roared with the voice of centuries, and the house itself shook. Doors appeared in the walls, opening onto other times, other victims. She glimpsed Catherine crawling across a floor that rotted beneath her, Anna praying to walls that had grown mouthed to mock her words. Margaret, all the Margarets, dozens of them each from different centuries, all 10 years old, all dying, all dead, all eternal. The cellar door was iron set with symbols that hurt to perceive, but it opened at Mary's touch. The stairs beyond descended far deeper than any cellar should, carved from stone older than the house, older than the hill, older than human memory. As she ran down them, she could hear Cornelius following, but his footsteps came from above and below simultaneously, as if he existed at both ends of the staircase at once. At the bottom, she found the truth. The cellar wasn't a cellar. It was a throat, carved from living rock, pulsing with a heartbeat that had been beating since before the earth cooled, and at its center, surrounded by the bones of girls who hadn't been warned about the wine, who hadn't been given locks, who hadn't been special enough to transform, at its center was the real Cornelius Blackwood, or what was left of him. The thing in the cellar had been human once, perhaps centuries ago, before the bargain that built the house, before the first child bride, before Millbrook was even a dream of civilization. It hung suspended in the air by roots that might have been veins, might have been tentacles, might have been the universe's intestines threading through dimensions no human mind could map. This was Cornelius Blackwood's true body, or his original sin made flesh, pulsing with stolen time, bloated with centuries of feeding on innocence. Mary stood at the threshold of understanding, her 10-year-old mind trying to process what her eyes insisted on seeing. The Cornelius upstairs, the one who had sat across from her at dinner, was merely a projection, a lure, a fingernail of this thing that had grown too large for any human shape to contain. Its skin was transparent, and inside she could see the others. Not just Catherine, Anna, and Elizabeth, but dozens of girls, hundreds maybe, all suspended in its viscous interior, like fruit in aspic. They were still moving, still aware, their mouths opening and closing in silent screams that had been going on for decades. "You shouldn't have come here." The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, from the walls themselves, from inside her own skull. The others knew to stay away. Even Elizabeth, clever Elizabeth, never came this far. "But you're different, aren't you? You can see the threads." And she could. Golden threads, invisible until now, stretched from the thing's center to everywhere, up through the house, out into Millbrook, across Pennsylvania, maybe across the world. Threads that connected to every person who had ever made a deal, every parent who had sold a child, every official who had looked the other way. The 30 pieces of silver her mother had taken weren't just payment, they were anchors, binding her family to this web forever. "Your father didn't die of lung fever," the thing that was truly Cornelius said, and its voice was almost gentle. "He tried to break the bargain, tried to take you and run. When he learned what I was, what would happen? But the threads, once you're caught in them, there's no escape. He drowned himself in that well to keep from bringing you here himself." Noble, really. Futile, but noble. Mary felt something break inside her chest, not her heart, but the story she'd been telling herself about her father's death. The truth was worse than any nightmare, but also strangely a relief. He had loved her. He had tried to save her. He had failed, but he had tried. "Every town has something like me," Cornelius continued, the suspended girls inside him turning to look at Mary with eyes that had gone white from seeing too much. Different shapes, different hungers, but always the same bargain. "We were invited in, you see, during the starving winter of 1609, when your ancestors were eating their dead to survive. They called out to anything that would save them. We answered. We always answer. And the price is always the same. The young, the innocent, the ones who haven't yet learned to sin properly, their time tastes the sweetest." Mary looked at the threads again, really looked, and saw something Cornelius hadn't expected her to see. The threads weren't just connections, they were translations, taking something from one place and moving it to another. The thing in the cellar was vast, yes, but it was also hollow. It needed the girls, not just for sustenance, but for substance. Without them, it was just hunger shaped like a man who had forgotten how to be human. Elizabeth saw it too, she whispered, understanding flooding through her like ice water. "That's why you keep them alive. You're not just feeding on them, you're made of them." The temperature in the cellar plummeted so fast that frost formed on Mary's eyelashes. The thing's attention focused on her with crushing weight, and she could feel it trying to pull her in, to add her to its collection right now. No more games, no more pretense. But Elizabeth's shadow was there again, along with others. Anna's hymn-singing ghost, Catherine's crawling spectre, and dozens more. All the girls who had been taken, all pushing back against their captor with the collective weight of their stolen years. "Run," Elizabeth's shadow whispered, and this time Mary could hear her actual voice, young like Mary's, but weathered by impossible experience. "Run, but not away. Run through. The house has doors that go everywhere. Find the one that goes to when." Mary didn't understand, but she ran anyway, back up the stairs that were already changing, stone becoming flesh, steps becoming teeth. Behind her the thing roared with the sound of centuries collapsing, and she could feel its projected body, the Cornelius who wore a human face, racing through the house above, below, beside her, existing in every timeline at once. She burst through the cellar door into a hallway that hadn't existed before. lined with doors that each opened onto different years. Through one, she saw Millbrook before it was Millbrook, when the indigenous people still lived here, before the hunger had arrived. Through another, she saw the town in flames, some future or past catastrophe, where the Blackwood house stood untouched among the ashes. Through a third, she saw herself, older, maybe 16, standing in a wedding dress, soaked in blood that wasn't hers, holding something sharp and smiling with too many teeth. "That's your future if you stay," Elizabeth's shadow said, solidifying beside her into something almost like a real girl. She was pretty, or had been, with dark hair and eyes that held too much knowledge. "If you let him feed on you slowly, if you transform like I did, you become like him, a hunger that wears a child's face. I fought it for 4 months, but in the end," she gestured to herself, translucent and wavering. "This is what fighting looks like, caught between human and monster, neither alive nor dead, helping the next girl in line because it's the only human thing I have left to do." More shadows joined them, all the wives, all the girls, a parade of stolen daughters converging in this impossible hallway. They all looked at Mary with eyes that held the same message. "You can't save us, but maybe you can save yourself. Maybe you can save the next one." "There's a door," Anna's ghost said, her hymns finally silent, "one that goes not to where but to whether. Whether this happened at all, whether the bargain was made, whether Cornelius ever came to but it means unmaking everything." Catherine finished, crawling even as a ghost, her legs never quite working right after what Cornelius had done to them. Everyone who was born because of the bargain, everyone who lived because of it, everyone who died, all of it gets unwoven. Mary thought of her siblings, fed with silver that came from selling her, thought of her mother, who would never have met her father if his family hadn't come to Millbrook following work at the mill that Cornelius's money had built. Thought of the entire town built on a foundation of complicity and silence, prospering from horror they chose not to see. "Show me," she said. They led her deeper into the house that was bigger inside than outside, through passages that existed in quantum superposition, through rooms where time ran backward and effect preceded cause. The Cornelius projection found them 3 times, each time wearing a different face. Young, old, ancient, but each time the collective ghosts drove him back, spending what little existence they had left to buy Mary seconds, minutes, just enough time to reach the door that could undo it all. It was small, child-sized, painted white like innocence itself. The handle was warm, not body temperature but sun temperature, holding the heat of every summer that should have been, every birthday these girls should have celebrated, every year they should have grown. On it was carved a single word: choose. "If you open it," Elizabeth's shadow said, fading now from the effort of maintaining cohesion, "everything changes. Your family might not exist. The town might not exist. We might never have been born at all, but neither would he. The hunger would never have been invited in. The bargain would never have been made." Mary heard Cornelius coming, not footsteps but existence itself bending around his approach. The walls began to bleed time, past and future mixing into a screaming now. She had seconds, maybe less. She thought about her siblings, probably sleeping peacefully in their beds, bought with blood money. She thought about her mother, who had chosen 30 pieces of silver over her eldest daughter. She thought about her father, who had died trying to save her. She thought about the next girl, and the next, and the next, in this town and every town, wherever hungry things wore human faces and parents made bargains with their children's lives. Mary's hand touched the doorknob, and immediately she saw everything that would unmake itself if she turned it. Like a film running backward, she watched Millbrook disappear building by building. The church where she'd been married 3 hours or 3 centuries ago crumbled into nothing. The general store where her mother bought flour with Cornelius's silver dissolved. Every family that had come to town following prosperity built on child sacrifice vanished like smoke. Her siblings flickered out of existence one by one. First baby Thomas, then the twins, then Sarah, each disappearing in reverse order of birth, until only Mary remained, but even she was different. She saw herself in another place, another time, daughter to different parents who had never heard of Millbrook, because Millbrook had never existed. Choose quickly, Elizabeth's shadow urged, her form now barely visible like breath on winter glass. He's almost here, and once he touches you again, you won't want to choose anymore. You'll want to stay. They always want to stay in the end. But Mary hesitated, her hand frozen on the warm door handle, because she could also see what would exist instead if she opened this door. Not nothing. Something else. The indigenous people who had lived here before the hunger came would continue uninterrupted. No starving winter of 1609, no desperate bargain, no invitation for ancient hungers to wear human faces. But also no her, no memory of any of them. All these girls who had suffered, all these wives who had died, all these daughters who had been sold. They would never have existed to suffer, but they would also never have existed at all. Is it better, she asked the assembled ghosts, to have never been born? They looked at each other, these shadows of murdered children, and for the first time since arriving at the Blackwood house, Mary saw something like peace in their faces. Catherine stopped crawling and stood straight. Anna's mouth closed on her endless hit. The dozens of others she'd never known by name became clear, distinct, real in a way they hadn't been since their deaths. Yes, they said in unison, their voices harmonizing into something that sounded like wind chimes made of bones. Yes, it is better. We choose never. We choose nothing. We choose the absence of choice rather than this eternity. The doorknob grew hotter under Mary's hand, and she realized it wasn't just warm, it was burning, searing her palm with the weight of unmaking. But she didn't let go. Behind her she could feel Cornelius arriving, not just the projection, but the true thing from the cellar, dragging itself up through dimensions to stop her. The house shook, walls becoming viscous, floors tilting at angles that shouldn't exist. Time itself was screaming. You don't know what you're doing, Cornelius's voice said from everywhere at once. Without me, without us, humanity would have died in that winter. We saved you. We cultivated you. Every advancement, every discovery, every moment of progress came because we were here, feeding, yes, but also providing. The silver that bought bread, the prosperity that built cities, the bargains that made civilization possible. You would undo all of it for what? For the ghosts of girls who are already dead. Mary turned to face him, her hand still on the doorknob, and saw him clearly for the first time. Not the human projection, not the thing in the cellar, but the truth that connected them. An absence that had learned to exist, a hunger that had put on flesh like clothing, a void that had convinced itself it was necessary. He was nothing pretending to be something, and he had been pretending for so long that even he believed it. You're not even real, she said, understanding flooding through her like dawn breaking. You're just the shape fear takes when it's been fed too long. You're what happens when people choose the easy horror over the hard hope. You're every parent who says, what choice did I have, when they had every choice. Every single choice except the one they made. The thing that was Cornelius contracted, condensed, became for one moment purely itself, not a man, not a monster, but a decision made manifest. The decision to trade innocence for security, to feed the future to the present, to choose the known horror over the unknown possibility. And in that moment of pure being, Mary saw something else. The door she was holding wasn't just an escape, it was judgment. Not on him, but on everyone who had ever fed him. Every parent who had sold a child, every official who had looked away, every neighbor who had whispered about the Blackwood brides, but done nothing. They would all be unmade along with their victims. Including your mother, Cornelius said, reading her realization. She took the silver. She made the choice. If you open that door, she never exists. You were never born. Your love for her, her love for you, complicated and corrupted as it was, all of it becomes nothing. Can you do that? Can you erase your own mother? Mary thought about her mother counting those 30 coins with shaking fingers, thought about the tears she'd heard through thin walls, thought about the choice between letting all 5 children starve or selling one to save 4. It wasn't a good choice, it wasn't a forgivable choice, but it was a choice made from desperation rather than evil. And wasn't that how the hunger always worked? It never came to the strong, it came to the desperate, the frightened, the ones who could convince themselves they had no other option. She would want me to, Mary said, and knew it was true. The mother who had sold her was one person, but the mother who had sung her to sleep, who had taught her to read, who had kissed scraped knees and whispered that everything would be all right, that mother would want her to open this door. That mother would want the cycle to end, even if it meant she had never been. But before Mary could turn the handle, Elizabeth's shadow did something unexpected. She solidified completely, becoming for one moment fully real, fully alive, fully present, and in that moment she pushed Mary away from the door and grabbed the handle herself. "No," she said, "this is my choice. I've been here longest. I've seen the most. I remember what it was like before I started changing, before I became like him. You still have that. You're still fully human. So here's what's going to happen." She turned to Cornelius, who had frozen in place, held by rules older than his hunger, a ghost who had become real, even for a moment, had certain privileges, certain powers. "I'm going to open this door, but I'm going to go through it alone, not to unmake everything, but to remake one thing, the bargain itself." "You can't," Cornelius snarled, but he couldn't move. None of them could. Elizabeth had become the fixed point around which all possibilities rotated. "I can. The door doesn't just go to whether, it goes to why, and I choose a different why. Instead of a bargain made from desperation, a gift given freely. Instead of hunger wearing human faces, humans choosing to face hunger. Instead of selling daughters to save sons, families choosing to starve together, rather than feast apart. I choose the timeline where people pick the hard hope over the easy horror, where your invitation was declined." She turned the handle, and the door opened not onto another room, but onto pure possibility. Through it, Mary could see not one future, but millions, all the ways the world could have been if different choices had been made. Some were darker, worlds where humanity had indeed died in that starving winter, but others were brighter, so much brighter, worlds where communities had shared their last crumbs instead of eating their dead, where they had died holding each other instead of living by selling each other. "This is my wedding gift to you," Elizabeth said to Mary. "Not a world without suffering, but a world where suffering isn't commodified. Not a world without death, but a world where death isn't bargained with. Go through. Choose which possibility you want to be true. Make it real by choosing it. What about you?" Elizabeth smiled, and for the first time she looked her age, 14, maybe 15, barely older than Mary herself. "I'm the key that locks him in. If I go through to remake the bargain, he comes with me. We're bound, he and I. He's made of all of us, but mostly of me, because I lasted longest, changed most. So I'll take him back to the beginning, and hold him there while you choose a better ending." The house was collapsing now, not physically, but temporally, all its collected years crushing down to a single point. The other ghosts were fading, their purpose served, their witness given. Cornelius was fighting against Elizabeth's hold, but she had become something he hadn't expected, not his victim but his judge, not his meal but his mirror, showing him exactly what he was by showing him what she had chosen not to become. Mary stepped through the door, and existence shattered into infinite fragments, each one reflecting a different choice, a different world, a different way the moment in 1609 could have gone, when the starving colonists had cried out for salvation. She was everywhere and nowhere, experiencing every timeline simultaneously, worlds where the hunger had never been invited in, worlds where it had been fought, worlds where humanity had evolved differently, learned different lessons, become something other than what they were in the world she'd known. In one timeline, she saw the colonists choosing death over cannibalism, and from their sacrifice growing a different kind of civilization, one that held certain principles sacred above survival itself. In another, she saw them discovering cooperation with the indigenous peoples earlier, learning survival techniques that made the desperate winter bearable without desperate measures. In yet another, the hunger had come anyway, uninvited, and humanity had spent centuries learning to fight entities that existed between dimensions, becoming warriors instead of victims. But in every timeline where Cornelius Blackwood didn't exist, neither did Mary Hartley. Her parents met different people, lived different lives, had different children or no children at all. She was the product of that original sin, that first bargain, and undoing it meant undoing herself. She could choose any of these timelines, step into any of these worlds, but she would cease to exist the moment she did. That's not quite true, Elizabeth's voice said, though Elizabeth herself was back in the collapsing house, holding Cornelius in place. You exist here, in the space between choices. You could stay here forever, observing but never choosing, real but never realized. It's what I did for the first year, after I died, or rather, after I transformed. This place, this moment of decision, it exists outside time. You could watch every possible world play out and never have to pick one. Mary turned and found herself facing not Elizabeth, but another version of herself, older, maybe 20, wearing a dress that combined elements from every era the house had existed in. This other Mary had eyes like Cornelius's, oil slick and ancient, but with something else in them too. Compassion, maybe, or the memory of it. You're me if I don't choose, Mary said. It wasn't a question. I'm you if you choose to become like him, if you go back through that door, if you accept what he offers, if you let him feed on you slowly while you learn to feed on others. Elizabeth opened the door, but she can't hold it forever. Eventually you have to choose, and one choice is to choose power over principle, to become the next hunger, to wear a child's face forever while feeding on other children's time. Why would I ever choose that? The other Mary smiled, and it was horrible because it was so genuinely warm. Because you'd remember this moment, remember all these girls. You'd tell yourself you'd be different, better, that you'd find a way to feed without killing, to take time without stealing lives. Every monster starts as someone who thinks they'll be a better monster than the one before them. Every abuser was once abused. Every hunger was once hungry. The cycle doesn't continue because people are evil. It continues because people think they can control evil, use it for good. Be the exception. Mary looked back at the infinite timelines, then at this older version of herself. But you're not real. You're just a possibility. Everything here is just a possibility until you choose it. That's what Elizabeth gave you, not just the chance to escape, but the chance to decide what escape means. You could unmake everything. You could recap everything. You could become everything. The other, Mary gestured to a timeline Mary hadn't noticed before, one that seemed dimmer than the others, less definite. You could choose the hardest option of all. In this dimmer timeline, everything had happened exactly as it had. The bargain in 6009, the centuries of feeding, the Blackwood house, the dead girls, even Mary's marriage to Cornelius 3 hours ago. But in this timeline, something different happened in this moment. Instead of unmaking the past or escaping to another possibility, Mary went back to the house, back to face Cornelius not as a helpless child, but as someone who had seen behind the veil, who understood what he was and what she could become. That's insane, Mary said. Why would I go back? Because Elizabeth can't hold him forever. Because if you don't go back, he'll simply find another girl, another town, another bargain. Because the only way to truly end a cycle isn't to erase it or escape it, but to break it from within. Because you've seen something he never expected you to see. That he's not powerful, he's just old. Not strong, just familiar. Not necessary, just present. And presence can be changed. Mary stared at the dimmer timeline, watching herself walk back through that door, back into the collapsing house, back toward the thing that had killed so many. But in this timeline, she wasn't walking back as a victim. She was walking back as something else, something new, something that had never existed before. A child who had seen eternity and chosen temporality, who had been offered godhood and chosen mortality, who had faced the ultimate hunger and decided to starve it out. If I go back, he'll kill me, probably, eventually, but not immediately.
He's curious now. You've done things none of the others did. You went to the cellar, you saw his true form, you opened the door, or rather Elizabeth opened it for you, but you brought her to the point where she could. He'll want to understand how, he'll want to study you, and while he's studying you, you'll be studying him. Finding his weaknesses, learning his rules, discovering what Elizabeth discovered, that he's bound by the very bargain that created him. He can only take what's offered, he can only feed on what's given, and you haven't given him anything yet. Mary felt the weight of this revelation settling into her bones. Every girl before her had been given to Cornelius by someone else. Parents, guardians, the town itself. They had been property transferred from one owner to another, but she had walked into his house on her own, had made choices at every turn, had refused the wine and opened the door and seen the truth. She was there, but she wasn't his. Not yet, maybe not ever. He'll try to break me. Yes, he'll show you wonders and horrors. He'll offer you everything and threaten to take everything. He'll be patient. He has nothing but time. But here's what he doesn't know. You've already been broken. Right here, right now, seeing all these possibilities, knowing that your entire existence is built on a foundation of other girls' bodies, you're already broken in the way that matters. And from that brokenness, you can choose what to build. You can choose to be broken but not defeated, damaged but not destroyed, traumatized but not transferred into another link in the chain of trauma. Mary looked one more time at all the timelines where she didn't exist, where the bargain was never made, where different choices led to different worlds. They were beautiful, some of them peaceful, just. But they were also unreachable because choosing them meant choosing to have never been able to choose them. The paradox made her head hurt, made her heart hurt worse. If I go back, she said slowly, what happens to Elizabeth? She becomes what she already is, a ghost with purpose. She'll help you, guide you, teach you what she learned. Together, you might find a way to do what neither of you could do alone. You might find a way to make Cornelius mortal again, to make him face judgment not from outside but from within, to make him remember what he was before he became hunger incarnate. He was a man once in 6009, a desperate, starving man who made a choice. Maybe he can choose again. Mary laughed, bitter and sharp. You think he can be redeemed? No, but I think he can be ended. Really ended, not just erased or avoided, but concluded. Every story needs an ending, even ancient ones, especially ancient ones. And you could be that ending, the last bride, the one who doesn't die or transform or escape, but who stays and makes him face what he's become, makes him see it through the eyes of a 10-year-old girl who should be playing with dolls instead of fighting cosmic horrors. The door was still open behind her, the passage back to the house, to the moment after Elizabeth had pushed her through. She could hear Cornelius roaring, Elizabeth laughing, the other ghosts singing something that might have been a lullaby or might have been a battle hymn. The house was still collapsing in on itself, still trying to exist in 17 different years simultaneously, still hungry for resolution. Mary stepped back through the door into the collapsing Blackwood house, and immediately everything stopped. The roaring, the shaking, the temporal collapse, all of it froze the moment her foot crossed the threshold. Cornelius stood suspended mid-lunge, his face distorted into something between human and horror.
Elizabeth's ghost flickered like a candle flame, her strength nearly spent from holding him. The other ghosts had faded to mere suggestions of light, their voices reduced to whispers that might have been wind. "You came back," Elizabeth breathed, and in those 3 words was disbelief, hope, and something like prayer. "No one ever comes back." "I'm not no one," Mary said, and her voice carried a weight it hadn't possessed 3 hours ago, when she'd entered this house as a bride. "I'm Mary Hartley. I'm 10 years old. I was sold for 30 pieces of silver, and I'm here to end this story." Cornelius unfroze, slowly, like ice melting in reverse, his form solidifying back into the grandfather gentleman appearance he preferred. But something was different now. He looked at Mary and, for the first time in centuries, appeared genuinely surprised. "You saw the doors promised. You saw worlds where you never suffered. Why would you choose this? Because those worlds don't need me. This one does." Mary walked past him, past Elizabeth, straight to the dining room where their untouched wedding feast still waited. She sat down at her place, picked up her fork, and began to eat the food she'd refused before. It tasted like ashes, and centuries, like the last meals of 100 dead girls, but she swallowed it anyway. "You wanted to feed on me slowly. Fine. But I'm going to feed on you too. Every story you tell, every memory you share, every moment you exist near me, I'm going to devour. I'm going to know you better than you know yourself. And then I'm going to show you what you really are." Cornelius laughed, but it was uncertain. "You think you can outlast me? I am eternal." "No, you're not. You're just very old. There's a difference." Mary took another bite, forcing herself not to gag. "Elizabeth learned it. That's why you're really afraid of her. Not because she fought you, but because she understood you. You're not a god or a demon or even a proper monster. You're just a man who made a bargain he couldn't unmake, and you've been running from that truth for so long you've forgotten it was ever true." She could see it hit him, the words finding cracks in his ancient armor. His form flickered, showing glimpses of other selves, the starving colonist from 1609, the first murderer from 1743, the thing in the cellar that was more hunger than flesh. All of them were him, and none of them were him, and the contradiction was driving him towards something like madness. "Tell me," Mary said, setting down her fork with deliberate calm, "what was her name? Whose name? Your first wife. Your real first wife. Before the bargain, before the hunger, when you were just a man in 1609, you had a wife. What was her name?" Cornelius went completely still. Not the stillness of predator waiting to strike, but the stillness of someone trying desperately not to remember something that would destroy them if they did. "There was no wife before. I have always been this. Liar." Mary stood up, and somehow she seemed taller than him, despite being 1/10 his size. "Her name was Mary too, wasn't it? Mary Blackwood. She died in the starving time, died while you died. And you were so hungry, so desperate, that when the others started talking about eating the dead, you stop." The word came out broken, fragmented, as if his throat had forgotten how to form human speech. "You didn't just eat her body, you ate her memory. You consumed everything she was, trying to keep some part of her alive inside you. And when that wasn't enough, when the hunger just grew worse, you made the bargain, not just for food, for her. To bring her back. But the thing that answered your call, it couldn't bring back the dead. It could only make you into something that could pretend she never died, that could marry girl after girl named Mary, looking for her in each one, killing them when they weren't her, trying again and again." Cornelius fell to his knees, his form fragmenting, showing all his selves at once: the grieving husband, the desperate cannibal, the bargain maker, the monster, the man. They overlapped and contradicted, tearing him apart from within. "How do you know this?" "Because I saw it when I looked through the door. I saw the moment that made you, and I saw something else. She forgave you. The original Mary, your Mary. In whatever place souls go when bodies are consumed, she forgave you." She's been trying to tell you for centuries, but you've been too loud with hunger to hear her. The house responded to Cornelius's emotional collapse by beginning its physical one again. Walls cracked, floors tilted, the ceiling began to rain plaster and older things. But Mary didn't move, didn't run. She stood perfectly still as chaos erupted around her, watching the thing that had terrified generations crumble under the weight of a truth he'd been running from for over 200 years. Elizabeth's ghost solidified beside Mary, no longer holding Cornelius back. He was holding himself now, trapped in the recursive loop of his own origin. "You know what has to happen now," Elizabeth said quietly. Mary nodded. She did know. The bargain that created him could only be unmade by him. He had to choose to let go, to stop feeding, to accept the death he'd been avoiding since 1609. But that meant accepting what he'd done to his wife, to all the girls after her, to himself. It meant facing judgment without the comfort of being a monster. Monsters don't choose, men do. "Cornelius," Mary said, kneeling beside him as the house fell apart around them. She was probably going to die here. The house wouldn't survive his unmaking, and she was too deep inside to escape, but that was acceptable. One life to end 2 centuries of horror seemed like fair trade. "Cornelius, look at me." He raised his head, and his eyes were human for the first time in longer than memory. Brown, ordinary, filled with the kind of grief that drives people to impossibility. "I just wanted her back. I know, but this isn't her. None of us were her. We were just girls named Mary that you killed looking for echoes of someone who was already gone." She took his hand, and it was warm, genuinely warm, with blood and life and mortality. "You can stop now. You can let us go. All of us, including yourself. If I unmake the bargain, everyone dies. The town, your family, everyone who benefited from it." "No, that was a lie you told yourself to make continuing feel noble. The bargain only binds those who fed directly. You, me, the girls you took. The town will survive. My family will be poor, but alive. The world will continue without the Blackwood fortune poisoning it." Mary squeezed his hand, feeling how fragile it was, how human. "But you have to choose it. You have to want to end." Around them the ghosts of all his wives materialized, not just Elizabeth, Catherine and Anna, but all of them, going back to the first Margaret in 1743. They formed a circle, holding hands, their white dresses glowing in the collapsing darkness. They began to sing, not hymns but something older, simpler, a lullaby. The same lullaby mothers had sung to daughters for 1,000 years before the hunger came. "I'm afraid," Cornelius whispered, and he was just a man again, just a terrified, guilty, exhausted man who had been carrying an impossible weight for centuries. "That's okay," Mary said. "Being afraid is human. You remember how to be human." He closed his eyes and spoke words in a language that predated words, unmaking a bargain that should never have been made. The house screamed. Reality tore, and Mary felt herself being pulled apart at the atomic level. But she held on to his hand, anchoring him to this moment, this choice, this ending. The last thing she saw before everything went white was the original Mary Blackwood, translucent and beautiful, reaching out to her husband with forgiveness that transcended death. The last thing she heard was Cornelius saying a name he hadn't spoken in 200 years, saying it like a prayer, like an apology, like goodbye. Then nothing, then everything, then something else entirely. Mary Hartley woke in her bed in her family's farmhouse. It was October. It was morning, and she was 10 years old. Her siblings were fighting over breakfast downstairs. Her mother was singing off-key while cooking. Her father was alive, coughing, but alive. Lung fever defeated by medicine. They could suddenly afford, because the bank had mysteriously forgiven their debts. There was no Blackwood house on the hill. There had never been a Blackwood house. In the town records, if anyone looked, they would find no mention of child brides or mysterious deaths, or a man who lived too long. Just ordinary history. Ordinary tragedies, ordinary joys. But Mary remembered. She remembered everything, because someone had to know that once there had been girls named Catherine and Anna and Elizabeth who had suffered and died and chosen to unmake themselves rather than let others suffer the same fate. Someone had to remember that even monsters had been human once, and that humanity was both the source of horror and its only cure. She kept the memory like a scar, like a secret, like a responsibility. And sometimes, when the autumn wind scraped tree branches against her window in a rhythm like counting, she whispered their names into the darkness. Not as a summons, but as a promise. The cycle was broken, the Inga was ended, the story was over. But stories, real stories, the ones that matter, they never really end. They just transform into lessons, into warnings, into the knowledge that every generation must choose again, whether to feed their children to their hungers, or to face those hungers themselves. Mary Hartley, 10 years old, survivor of a timeline that no longer existed, keeper of memories that never happened, understood this. And when she grew up, when she had daughters of her own, she would tell them, in terms they could understand, that they were never for sale, not for 30 pieces of silver, not for 300, not for all the wealth and safety in the world, because some prices are too high to pay, and some hungers should never be fed, and some cycles once broken must never be allowed to begin again. In the place where the Blackwood house had never stood, wildflowers grew.